Hello, my name is Bob Ganzak, and this is Motivation U, the podcast. Motivation U, the podcast, coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill inside the Coach's Podcast Room. And today we have an incredible guest, a great storyteller. We've been having so much fun and just leading up to this. I probably should have started the tape rolling about a half hour ago. My guest today is Mr. Ed Potts. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you.
Ed is a financial advisor with
Edward Jones.
Also serves on the Ronald McDonald House Board of Directors, right?
Correct.
All right, awesome. And this journey that we're going to discuss today is something that Freddie Wiebe has talked to me a little bit about it in the past, yet as we were discussing, I don't like to get too much information because I like to kind of dig and find out what we have going. This program is about leadership. It is about uncovering how certain individuals get to be a leadership role, because we don't all have the last name of Buffett or Gates or Musk or Bezos. Yet some of the greatest and best leaders are working for companies like yours. Elise, I can't remember her last name, but she works for Edward Jones' office in Columbia County in Lake City.
Okay.
And Esperman?
Yep. She's a newer rep. We changed regions a few years ago, so she was just coming on board when we moved to my office south.
Okay.
All the way through the villages and that area. And so I didn't get a chance to know her well, but I know what she's done since she started, and you don't get from here to there without being talented.
She graduated from the Dale Carnegie class that I had pre-pandemic in Lake City, and she was just a great student, one of those individuals that just absorbed everything that was going on inside the room and just really paid attention to not only the things that I said, but what the other students had to say also, which is a big part of that.
Elisa Epperson. Yeah.
Elisa, yes. I always remember the first name because my wife's first name is Elisa, so that one's easy to remember, but I was struggling with the last name. So where did life begin for Ed Potts?
So I grew up in a tiny little town north of Lafayette, Indiana, Lafayette, West Lafayette, which is where Purdue University is. A rural community, I think 1,400 was the population then. It's 1,400 now, so I still have family that's there. My sister is a kindergarten teacher. My brother Tom and his wife live in Frankfort, Indiana, which is not very far away. Tom is also a teacher, and his wife Jody runs a restaurant in Brixton.
Oh, wow.
That has been in their family for more than 30 years, maybe 40 years. Her dad still cooks, and she and her sister run the restaurant, breakfast and lunch. A lot of the same farmers every morning. J&J Diner, so if you're in Brixton, Indiana, on Highway 43. So that's where I grew up. Went to.
Are you going to get a free meal for that plug? Or?
Probably, yeah. So at the time, when I was a kid, we still had the elementary, middle school, and the high school was all there in Brixton. Even though we had combined with another small town, we were the bigger town, and so. But as I think my class was, I think it was the last class to graduate from high school in Brookston, and then they moved the high school to Chalmers. And so we walked to school all growing up. You had. I mean, I don't even think we had locks on our doors. I know we didn't, because I did not have a house key ever. Just the kind of small town you would see in TVs that, there was no real place to work in our town unless you went out and baled hay or picked up rocks or cut corn out of beans, detasseled and that kind of thing. And so I did that a lot growing up. And I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My parents, we had 4 boys, and then my little sister came along. I went to Purdue. You really didn't have an option in our family. My parents both went to Purdue. My dad was a crazy Purdue sports fan. So, Purdue and the Cubs, those were 2 things. Back then, we didn't have cable. You had the old antenna, and we had like a Brady Bunch house with, the tri-level kind of thing. And so when the Cubs would come on WGN, I was the oldest, so I had to climb up to the roof and adjust the antenna while my dad would yell to my brother, who would then yell to me, to move it, and then hold it there until I finally got to come down and watch some of the ball game. But
oh wow, you just brought back memories there. I remember when you finally got the remote one where you could turn the little knob on you, and you could hear it, the antenna moving to pick up the signal. Now, you and I have a similar life. I don't know when you came to Florida. When did you come south?
Let's see. I got my wife Reagan to come to Indiana for 7 winters, and she's a Florida girl. 7 winters was enough.
Okay, and then it came down south.
So she got an opportunity to move her office with Edward Jones from Indiana to Gainesville, and I was just beginning the transition to the new owner of my insurance agency. So I had 2 years yet. It was a different transition than it is with Edward Jones, and so for 2 years I flew back and forth. So she came down in 2010 or 2011. And I came down about a year later. Later
than that. So both of us grew up with 2 terms that are coined in the world: Midwest values, Southern hospitality. Right? Those are the 2 things we hear so much. Yeah. How do you see those 2 value systems, being that they are accurate or not accurate? I don't think that they are just blankets for both. How do you see those 2 value systems working into a leadership role? What are the differences between, if any, between leaders we saw in the Midwest and leaders we see in the South that kind of have that Midwest values versus that Southern hospitality?
My wife being from the South, born in Miami but grew up in Ocala, and when we met, she was in Atlanta, and definitely had that. The Southern hospitality and the just certain things had to be a certain way. It's sir and ma'am always, and adults were Miss or Mr.
Right.
Now we did have my mom and dad's best friends. We referred to them as Miss Mary and Mr. Wayne. Growing up, but they had Southern roots, and so that was kind of their preference. I think the thing I saw different growing up in my first jobs, Midwestern values, the rules were, and maybe it's just our age. I think you and I are a similar age, and there was just a set of rules, and that was that. That's the way you did it. And I liked that. I liked knowing what needed to be done so that I could do it exactly the right way, and there was no mistaking it. And then, as I moved south, times had changed too in regards to, that's not necessarily the proper way to do things, and we have to be more open-minded, and my wife would laugh and say that's why I'm retiring. That's why I would be retired. You know, there are changes that were easier for me and changes that are more difficult, simply because the way in which I've done my job on the investment side is just rote, and and it's not because that's the way it has to be done. It's the way I prefer to do it. It's
Correct.
the way I think I bring the most value to my clients. But that job is changing, not just at Edward Jones. It's changing like many jobs, and so it's a good time. It's a good time for me to do the transition, and the transition at Edward Jones or in the investment business is so much different than in the insurance business. You know, I had 2,000 clients in Indiana, and when you sell your agency, say I sell it to you, you want and you need those introductions.
2,000, yep.
So 2,000 accounts might be 1,000 people, but it's 1,000 introductions of me being there when you shake hands with that person.
Wow.
Because you're buying my retention ratio. That's what you're paying for.
Okay.
You're not paying for those clients. You're paying for the clients that stay.
Yeah.
Right? And so for them to stay.
That percentage as big as possible
Exactly.
of that 1,000.
Yeah. Otherwise,
They're going to go to their buddy down the street or that's in the Rotary Club or whatever.
And integrity in regards to the way I've always done business is I would have an issue having you pay me X and then not giving you what you paid for. So when Reagan got the opportunity to move to Florida, she understood. She had worked for Nationwide. Reagan being my wife, yep. Reagan had worked for Nationwide as well, and she understood. We just could not work together in the same agency. We love each other, but working together in the same office would just not have worked. Our personalities and the way in which we do business are not the same. We are both good at what we do, but we're good in our own ways.
So I came south in 95.
Okay.
From St. Joe, Michigan.
Okay.
So
Yeah, just
not
across
too far.
the Indiana line. Yeah.
not too far from your world. And I came down, we started a radio station in Ocala, brought it to Gainesville a year later, Wind FM, that was
Okay, sure.
our project. And I can remember, being introduced to our banker, our lawyer, our insurance agent, all of the key, and they all said to me, "Oh, we're going to slow you down." No, you're not. Oh, Mr. Bob. And Mr. Bob, this is 95. I'm 39 years old at the time when I came here, and people, 20 years older than me are calling me Mr. Bob, and I'm like, I'm not understanding this, I really wasn't. So it took me a little while to really absorb the difference between that Southern hospitality and not to, I think a lot of times we take it as a weakness, where there's some bite behind that Southern hospitality too.
Right? Yeah.
Their values might be different as far as the path that they get to than you and I grew up with, but there is some, intensity that is there.
It was probably when I sold my agency and I was able to finally relocate. I still had maybe 6 months to go in my contract, but we had gotten through the clients. The fellow who bought the insurance agency from me had been in the office 6 months or so before we officially told the client. So we'd had time to introduce him, and folks started drawing their own conclusions. And but when I came to Florida, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was 52. We were okay financially without me going to work immediately, but I wanted and needed to go back to work. And I worried because I had built my business in a community where I was already involved up to my eyeballs. The church we went to was catty corner from my office, my kids' school. We were in the same district where my kids went to school. I coached Little League. I was involved with the Sertoma Club up there, which is a fraternal organization like Lions and Kiwanis and Rotary. So I knew everybody. And here I'm coming to a town where I know no one. And those people that I do know are probably clients of my wife's. So I am not going to be able to do business the way in which, from my perspective, why I was successful was because I knew all these folks, right?
Right.
And I learned, that isn't necessarily the case. You have other skills, but to me, I felt like I was starting off with a huge disadvantage, that I knew no one here, and the culture was different.
Yes.
I was more comfortable in Alachua than I was in Gainesville, because Alachua was more like my hometown. A lot of farmers, a lot of sportsmen, a lot of more of a rural type vibe. My office and Reagan's office are only 15 minutes apart, but the demographics of our clientele are inordinately different.
I've been in. There's an office in High Springs also.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in that office.
Mm-hmm.
The people that were going to the back of that, I kind of picture it in my mind. It's just a small little house.
Right.
You
Yes.
go to the back of the house, the back room in the back. It's very small, but it's amazing to me how a small place like that serves so many people too.
Well, it's funny, and the jobs where I spent the most time in my career, McDonald's with Ray Kroc, a company that I love. I'm still a stockholder, and I listened to the last McDonald's stockholder meeting while I was out for a walk one morning, and Ray Kroc was quoted at least 4 times, talked about multiple times. And he would have been 121 years old this year. And yet McDonald's still, go to their website, their corporate website, it's still going to talk about Ray Kroc. So the culture there is still about Ray Kroc. And a lot of the things he set as ways in which they wanted to do business, all those years ago. Then I worked for JCPenney. JCPenney, who the man is still revered and talked about on an ongoing basis. Well, at Edward Jones, it's Ted Jones, the son of our founder, was Edward Jones, but his son Ted was really who took us from a very small regional firm to what we are today. And Mr. Jones is honored at every summer regional meeting when we gather together at the conference trips where you travel as an award. At the last summer regional, which includes all of the advisors in your region and your families, your spouse and your children, somebody does a Ted Jones toast before we begin the last night, the dinner and the awards. And this year I got to do that. It was the first time I'd done it. I was really honored. Normally that would go to the most tenured veteran in the region. But since it was my last summer regional as an advisor, I'll get to go as a spouse with Reagan. But they asked me if I would be willing to do that, and what an honor. So again, 3 different companies, all 3 with ties going back to the founder, that still has meaning even for a new person that's hired today, that maybe their parents weren't even born when Ted Jones was still out and about.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. We're talking here with Ed Potts, with Edward Jones, financial advisor, also on the board of directors of the Ronald McDonald House Charities of North Central Florida, which hopefully near the end of this hour we'll get a chance to talk about that. Yet you opened a can of worms here in that last part of the conversation. One thing I will interject also, I work for a company called Dale Carnegie Training. And again, another one of those names that Mr. Carnegie started his company 111 years ago this October. But it was his wife that after he passed that really took it global, that really became the driving force after Dale was gone. Dorothy Carnegie just really took it to another level. So one of the things I saw on your resume is that you started as a shift manager for a McDonald's back many, many, many years ago. Mm-hmm. All right. What are your ties to McDonald's, and why did you take that as one of your first jobs ever into the world?
Oh, that, yeah. Just rein me in if I start telling
if I go
McDonald's stories.
If I go like this, that means we want to slow down a little bit. All right.
So I'm the oldest of 5 kids. 4 brothers and my sister, who's the youngest. And growing up in Brookston, it's where my dad had lived his whole life. So when my mom and her family had moved from Oak Park, Illinois, suburb of Chicago, mm-hmm. To West Lafayette to open a McDonald's restaurant. My grandpa had bought that franchise directly from Ray Kroc. He was in Oak Park as well. And my grandpa had worked for Kraft Foods for many, many years, and they wanted him to move to New York. He didn't want to move, and he felt like he needed to find an opportunity because he didn't think they were going to react well to him not moving. Mm-hmm. And so he took a franchise, bought a franchise from Ray Kroc directly. This is back in 1958, maybe 1957 when the conversation started. So when he opened that store, it was one of the first 100 McDonald's stores, probably in the 60 range. There's a difference between the store numbers, like you'll see on a receipt. There's when they signed the contract and when the store actually opens for business. So, okay. So my mom had already come to.
Your question.
Yes, yeah.
So when it goes from franchisee to franchisee, do they take the original number of the store that it was bought, or does it multiply?
I would think if the location hasn't changed, then that store number is going to be the same, even if it's a different owner.
So if it was store number 72, and that became in 1963, and you bought it today in 2023, right. It's still probably
right. It should be.
Go back to your story.
Because the original store they bought has moved location, so I would assume that store number changed. The one they built by Purdue is still the same. But the reason I know the number doesn't change is because Mike Stryker's store in Alachua sold. And when I came to town, because I'm a nerd when it comes to McDonald's, I knew it was store number 7111, the Alachua store on 441 and I-75. And it's still 7111, even though Mike doesn't own it anymore. But anyway, I grew up at McDonald's. There's pictures of me in a diaper and a McDonald's paper hat standing on the counter at McDonald's. When I came home from the hospital, there's pictures of me in the little cradle wearing a paper McDonald's hat. Oh, wow. So I literally have been, I was born and raised at McDonald's. So my dad was a Purdue student. My mom had come to Purdue, which is why my grandpa selected that West Lafayette as a location.
I gotcha.
So they moved down. My dad worked at McDonald's just as a Purdue student. My mom was working while she was going to school. They met and began dating. And so my dad became then a manager, and my grandpa's general manager, my grandpa's right hand. And so I grew up loving McDonald's the way I loved the Cubs or any sports team. I just loved the business model. I loved the simplicity. I loved that my dad would come home and talk about his key people, the managers. We got to know the managers. We knew the managers' kids. It was like a family, literally. My mom's 2 sisters, husbands also worked at the store and became managers. So really, when we got together as a family, that my mom's side of the family, everybody worked at McDonald's. And being the oldest, I got to go to work with my dad more than my siblings did, and just being able to work when it was busy, and they wouldn't let me go in the kitchen, but to clean tables and take out trash.
Just be around it.
Oh yeah, just to be around it. So
how are you connected with Ray Kroc?
So Ray Kroc is my grandmother's brother. So my grandmother is Lorraine Kroc.
Okay.
So when Ray, got into the business, he went, the early franchisees, many of them were Ray's friends, people he knew from the country club and people he knew in his dealings with Lily Tulip and Prince Castle, the companies he worked with before. And so the problem was, growing up, I knew my grandfather didn't really like Uncle Ray. And so it took me years. My grandfather was a very intimidating person, very, very intimidating. My grandma was full of life and fun and always wanted to do fun stuff. My grandpa was much more, he'd be more likely to be reading or doing a crossword puzzle, and wasn't really one to engage with the kids. And so it took until I was older when we would have those discussions, deeper discussions, when I asked him how you chose to go into business with somebody who you don't seem to like or respect. And he said straight up, no, I didn't respect him, but the business I knew was good. And it just came at the right time. Like I said, he felt like he'd put himself in a corner with Kraft.
That was his brother-in-law.
That was his brother-in-law. But there were issues that had gone back just with my great-grandmother and her care later in life. And Ray was in no help and no financial support. And so she ended up living with my grandpa and grandma. And that, I think... And then the movie, if you've watched the movie, all of the get-rich-quick scheme stuff, that's 100% true.
Okay.
So... when you do that kind of thing, you burn a lot of bridges because you're always pushing your next thing on somebody else. And
that takes me to a leadership thing also. How did this man who we all have, challenges in our life, little things, idiosyncrasies that we do that maybe other people would look upon and say are not like these get rich, quick, ideas and thoughts. But how does a person like that build a platform that so many Fortune 500 companies have tried to copy as far as their leadership?
I mean, that is what made me so interested in his story. Even though my grandfather he really didn't want us to have a relationship with him because he felt, and then there were other things that happened after he bought the franchise that made that divide even further.
I'm sure that got really interesting after that.
But my point is, I knew he didn't have a high school diploma, much less a college degree, and I'm looking at what he created. Right? And the skill and the talent and the dedication and the drive and the ambition and all the things that have to, what has to, and now he was doing this at a time when, everything it was the time, it was a boom time, right? But nonetheless, why wasn't 1,000 stores enough? Or 2,500. You know what I'm saying? I look at it and say...
It's still Burger King has been bought by PepsiCo and they've been bought by these people and that, and this one is... But McDonald's Corp has never shifted.
They have been number one in their sector, not even close, since their inception. Now in fast food back then, there really wasn't a lot of fast food. You had A&W Root Beer and Steak and Shake were more regional, but and they've both been bought by other companies. But I look at that, and again, this was because I wrote every paper in English, every paper in any class where they're asking me to write a composition or a paper.
You wrote about McDonald's.
I wrote about McDonald's, or I wrote not so much about Ray Kroc, but about McDonald's. But because what a story. It is the Horatio Alger story.
It is.
It's brought to life. You're talking about someone who didn't graduate from high school, was successful in sales, but that doesn't always transition
a lot of successful people in sales.
He had no experience in food service. And then the whole argument about the founder thing. I'm not a fan of calling himself the founder. I never was, because I respect what the McDonald's brothers did. Mm-hmm. And my Lord, Ray Kroc accomplished plenty without having to claim the founder, right? So
can you hold that thought for a second?
Sure.
We're going to take a break, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to come right back to that, all right?
Okay.
You're listening to Motivation U, the podcast, talking about McDonald's and Ray Kroc and a lot of other things, coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill inside the Coach's Podcast Room. I'm Bob Ganzak. We'll be right back.
Hi there, this is head ball coach Steve Spurrier, and I'm here with my wife Jerry and our good friend Sherry Houston, the executive director of the Ronald McDonald House Charities of North Central Florida. We're thrilled to announce that the 2-year anniversary of our restaurant, Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, is coming up on August 14th. Last year we had so much fun celebrating with everybody that we're doing it bigger and better this year. We're hosting a special dinner and celebration that will include a chef's choice of premium buffet or your favorite Spurrier Gridiron Grill menu, including a filet mignon carving station, shrimp and grits, short rib risotto, wonderful seafood options, and many dessert options also.
Like my famous chocolate chip cookies.
Proceeds being donated to the local Ronald McDonald House.
Thrilled to once again partner with Coach Jerry and the Spurrier Gridiron team to raise funds for the Ronald McDonald House, benefiting families and children experiencing medical emergencies.
Spurrier's Gridiron Grill will be donating 11% of all of our money from food and 66% of drink sales to the Ronald McDonald House.
Go to Spurriers.com right now and reserve a ticket before they sell out.
We'll have wonderful food, special guests, and a limited edition of the 2nd year anniversary collector's coins, as well as prizes like a dinner with me and Jerry. We couldn't have become one of the busiest and most successful restaurants in the Southeast without your support. So we want to celebrate with the most important people of our team, and that's you.
I want to celebrate with some of those cookies. Do you have any of those?
Sure do. Right here for you.
Oh, thank you.
We still hear it. The sound of victory. The joy of being part of something great. And while things may not be the same right now, we haven't gone anywhere.
If you bleed orange and blue, then Meldon Law is the firm for you.
Jeffrey, what are you doing?
Well, I'm joining the band, of course. Since Meldon Law is the official law firm partner of the Florida Gators, I want to help.
Dad, we're litigators. Let's stick to helping people in the courtroom.
Well, can we still hang out and jam a little bit?
At Meldon Law, we won't back down.
Looking for more reasons to celebrate? We have them here at Celebration Point. Enjoy some of the newest additions to our already celebratory lineup, like Dave & Buster's, Les Macarons, and Prime and Pearl. There's always a reason to celebrate. Join us anytime for any occasion. Celebration Point, where Gators come to celebrate.
Welcome back to MotivationU, the podcast. My name is Bob Ganzak. My guest today, Ed Potts. We've been talking about so many leadership, McDonald's, Ray Kroc, the founders. We've been chatting about Muhammad Ali and some different things. But go back to what you were talking about, the founder, and how you had respect for the McDonald's brothers.
So a lot of folks, when I'll enter into a discussion, and really prior to the last couple of months, I mean, I mostly have these discussions online where people are discussing McDonald's, and I love the McDonald's story, and in particular the Ray Kroc story, and so I could comment and make my opinions known without unveiling a whole lot of other stuff. Now, kind of the cat's out of the bag, as my wife said, the cat's out of the bag now. But the argument would be about, oh, he's not the founder. Well, I'm not promoting him as the founder.
Right.
But you have to watch the movie and understand that the founder title is there for a reason, because it creates more controversy.
People are talking about you.
Yeah, people talk about whether or not he stole McDonald's from the McDonald's brothers, and I heard an analogy. Somebody said, if a baby is laid on your doorstep and you raise that child, who's the parent?
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And so the McDonald's brothers had one successful store, one very successful store that obviously caught Kroc's attention and captivated him. He wanted to replicate it down to the letter. I mean, he loved everything they did. And they had tried to franchise. When he asked them initially to franchise, they said it failed. And that in the movie, it's portrayed that way. It's accurate. They had tried to franchise, and they had stores in other parts of California and Nevada and I believe Arizona, and none of them had worked. In my belief, and I think Kroc's belief too, was these two ran their primary restaurant. They were on site. They were on site owners and managers. And you can't replicate that unless you're going to be on site at these franchises. So
train somebody to do that.
So they just simply couldn't get anybody to be as diligent as they were in the way that their business was done. And since their business was built on process and quickness and efficiency, and then the food had to be good too. And so their franchises failed, so they told Ray no, and he just pestered them until they told him yes. And so I don't agree with calling himself the founder, but as far as the McDonald's that we know as the McDonald's Corporation with 40,000 units worldwide, dominant in their category since the day they began, that was built by Ray Kroc. So,
Yeah, and if they would have failed, if Ray would have failed year 3, year 4, nobody today would say he stole them.
Right.
Only because of the success do you get that moniker, which is a big part of what leadership is. We get criticized from being leaders sometimes until our companies are successful. And there may have been a ton of other factors why the company was successful, other than your leadership.
Or despite
right,
your leadership.
That's my point. And we still may have made a positive impact on people as the company did not succeed.
My grandfather was not a big fan of Ray, and he talked a lot about, and I don't think it was just about Ray. I think, he worked for Kraft Foods, and he worked directly, for Mr. Kraft. This is in the 30s, right after the Depression, 30s and 40s, and I think he had seen people in a large corporation get stepped on. If they were tied to a particular leader, that leader ends up leaving, and then those people who were on the move up are all of a sudden no longer moving up. And so he saw a lot of people, because he was involved in the company from the very beginning, and then is married to Ray's sister. And so he knows a little bit more about the folks that lost out, that fell out of favor or whatever. And there's always going to be people who get
hindsight is always.
But I look at that and say again, in the end, you built a corporation that has continued to dominate their category, and again now they're back hottie, and the stock is at an all-time high. It is. It's just an incredible story. So I wrote papers for years about McDonald's and about Ray, but I never shared them with my grandparents, right? My parents, but because I didn't want my grandpa to be, upset or disappointed that he felt I was putting Ray on a pedestal that he didn't deserve.
Gotcha.
Where I believed, from my perspective, I'm not looking at all what happened. All
Forget
I know
the family
is
dynamics. Just look at the business dynamics.
Yeah. But I was very proud of what my parents and my grandparents did with their stores. But they made their money on stock. They were smart enough to buy McDonald's stock when it went public. And you read any of the McDonald's books, there's a multitude. Grinding It Out is Ray's autobiography, but there are other McDonald's books, both good and looking at McDonald's from good and bad perspectives. And then there's another one that's about Ray and Ray's wife Joan specifically, and all of the philanthropic things they did with the money that came from McDonald's. And it shows the stock price history, and you can look and see how many times it split 2 for 1 and 3 for 2, and many, many times. So when you talk about if he would have failed, nothing would have happened. But since they succeeded in our business, in investment business, it would be similar to somebody who bought Apple stock at $10 a share and called their broker when it hit 100 and sold it. And they made 10 times their money, right? They are very happy at the time, but then the stock goes to splits and splits and splits, and they would have made a whole lot more money if they kept it. And so they're going to blame their broker for letting them sell it at $100.
You allowed me to sell that.
So you made 10 times what you invested. I think your broker probably did a pretty good job, but you chose to exit. Mm-hmm. The McDonald's brothers chose to sell their 0.5% interest in the McDonald's Corporation for $2.7 million, split between the two of them, enough to get them $1 million each after taxes back in 1963.
And that's what they were looking for. It probably was a figure that they had
It was a figure that they had in mind, but of course, the heirs would have benefited far more with having 5% of the McDonald's Corporation and the stock that they had, and so the bigger McDonald's got, the more ripped off they were, right?
Yeah. Well, in people's minds.
Yeah. So I look at it. I respect what the McDonald's brothers did to have a restaurant that needed 8 multi-mixers and to be revolutionary in their design to go with a drive-in with no car hops, right? That's what caught his attention. So they created something that was amazing, but he grew it into something that was, historical.
I recall my friend, as I said to you when we were off on break, my friend Tom Potts owned a few McDonald's in the southwest corner of Michigan. Bridgman, Berrien Springs, Benton Harbor, and St. Joe, I think, were the 4 that he had, if I remember correctly. But we were having a conversation, this would have been early 90s, because McDonald's was one of the first companies that I remember that banned smoking inside the facility. And I remember sitting in Tom's McDonald's and asking him, is this going to hurt your business? And he said, no, we will change the way restaurants do business because of this. Because, everybody was like, if you stop smoking, nobody's going to come to McDonald's. But they were one of the first that did that.
Yeah.
And it's that type of, it's like owning the land. I've heard people say they're not necessarily in the food business, they're in real estate business. Where, the Burger King or the Little Caesars or whatever was renting or leasing the space, McDonald's owned it.
Yep.
And the other dynamic of that, and I want you to talk about these three things, is that if a McDonald's changed locations, it was leveled immediately.
Yeah. McDonald's and Disney are two companies, two corporations that will protect their logo and protect their, what's the word I'm looking for? The way in which they're presented to the public, to a T. I mean, so McDonald's does not want an empty McDonald's. They don't want a closed McDonald's. You're rarely, if ever, going to see it unless there's a fire or something like that. That building's going to come down because they don't like the appearance of a store that closed, especially if it's going to reopen or it's getting remodeled or they're moving it 2 streets over for whatever reason. And Disney's the same. Well, Ray Kroc, and again, you can see this, it's not so much in the movie, I don't think it's in the movie, but it's certainly in the book, of the number of times McDonald's would go after a franchisee that left McDonald's and opened up their own and did anything that infringed upon McDonald's. Like they have a sandwich that was too close to a Big Mac or a sign that was too close, they would go after them. That's part of what my grandpa said. There's no reason for him to step on these people. But he would say, he was quoted in the movie as saying, you know, if his competitor was drowning, he'd stick a hose in his mouth and make sure he finished him off.
But he's protecting every franchisee that is invested into, you know, that's what we would expect of the person that is in charge of the company.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to protect my investment.
The golden arches and I mean, you can see everything that they copyright, you know, anything that's muffin, whatever.
Yes.
It is, and Disney is the same. They don't want their trademark or their characters being portrayed in any light that has gone through their filters. Yeah.
So your parents were franchisees?
My parents took over the original store when my grandparents sold it. All of us kids owned the store on Purdue. It was a way to spread the stock out between the grandkids and the children. And then my dad had his own store over in Lafayette on the other side of the river. And when my dad had a heart attack in 74, my grandfather was already starting to retire, really didn't want to come back. McDonald's at that time was growing leaps and bounds and wanted to add more stores to that market. My dad's like, oh, we're not adding more stores. I'm not in good health with what we have. And I was 14, so I was too young to take over. So they negotiated and sold the market. So not just those stores, you're selling the market, because McDonald's at that time, and probably still today, doesn't really want a franchise store mixed with a company store in the same market. They're going to be run differently, and their preference would be to have one franchisee. And so they sold the market, and my dad, you know, lived a few more years, but it just wasn't going to be smart for him to stay in the business. He wanted to get back in. He had an opportunity to take a store down in Kentucky, close to my old Kentucky home, and my mom told him, if you take that store, we're staying here. we're not moving. And then a community just north of where we lived in Monticello, Indiana, did not have a McDonald's, and McDonald's wanted to put one there. And so they said, how about you take just that one single store? And he was going to do that, which we would have really enjoyed that. And my grandpa talked him out of it and just said, listen, your health is not where it needs to be. Your family's not ready to take this over. What you're doing is you're going to pull me back in, and I don't want you to do that. So he didn't do it. And so that was that as far as McDonald's. So when I started, going way back to your question earlier, what made me go to McDonald's? That's the only place I ever wanted to work. So when I got my driver's license, I drove to McDonald's, and I went to the store that my dad owned. And that's where I applied. I knew a lot of the managers. I didn't know a lot of the people, the kids that worked there. But I knew the managers because they all worked for my parents or my grandparents.
What was the foundation of leadership that you learned from that very first role? What were the things that they did within a McDonald's that a young, 16, 17, 18-year-old would learn about leadership from working in a McDonald's?
I know you've seen it online. You could go just Google the famous people who have worked at McDonald's and how important that they felt McDonald's was in their upbringing. So it was the same for me. It wasn't, once I started working, I was just a kid. I was just a kid working at McDonald's. That's the way that I looked at it. I just had read the operating manual. I grew up at McDonald's. I loved the store. I just loved it. And to me, what I learned was personal responsibility, whether it's simply working the hours that you're scheduled or doing it the right way, because I knew that meat needs to be centered on the bun and the cheese doesn't slop over to the side, and that it needs to be wrapped and presented, and it needs to be, there's a way in which it's supposed to be done. French fries. If you simply make French fries the way McDonald's tells you, they're going to be perfect every time, which means you don't leave the French fries out to the point that they get soggy. So you pour them into the basket, you shake them, you drop them into the oil, the temperature's already set, you press the button. When they're done, you lift them out. You don't wait, listen to the buzzer going off forever. And you lift them up, you drain the grease, you shake them, you pour them in, and you salt them the way they're supposed to. They will be perfect every time. So when they're not, somebody failed.
Yes.
So I learned how you clean the shake machine. And if you clean the shake machine the right way, it isn't going to break down. Like people joke about the Sunday machine not working in the middle of the day. So responsibility, personal responsibility, doing things in a accurate process and in following that procedure. It drives my wife nuts when I walk up to a building. It doesn't have to be a restaurant. I walk up to a building with dirty windows, and I'm like, never would have passed inspection at McDonald's. You did not open your doors until your windows were washed by hand, inside and out. And sometimes the maintenance guy, back then, the maintenance guy worked overnight. And if the maintenance guy got sick or didn't show up, they would ask whoever was closing, does anybody want to stay and do maintenance? And hard to believe, but they would let like a 16 or a 17-year-old, two people to do that. And so I would stay. Extra hours, heck yes, I might get overtime. But when you went to check out in the morning, when the manager came in to open, you're not leaving until he's checked every window, checked the stainless steel, checked the floor to make sure it was mopped properly. That's the way I was raised. So we went to a breakfast place, not McDonald's, coming back from vacation, and they have a wastebasket right out in front. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. The wastebasket is overflowing, trash on the ground. I'm like, how can you, of whatever you're not going to clean, you can't have a full trash can at the entrance of your restaurant be overflowing with trash. It's a bad impression from the get-go. Those kinds of things, those details, probably why my siblings hated working for me at McDonald's, because my expectations for them were even higher.
Than everybody else's.
Listen, you grew up in the same house, so you know this stuff, and friends that will watch this podcast that are lifelong friends from my first McDonald's store.
Wow.
I mean, there's 8 or 10 of us that will get together, and we worked together when we were 16. They did not go to my school. They were in Lafayette. They went to a school with more people than I had in my town. Right?
Wow.
I remember that you growing up in more of a rural community, when I went, and I'm just meeting people, and I introduced myself to this guy, and he says, where do you go to school? I go to Frontier. And where do you go to school? He says, I go to Lafayette Jeff. And I said, oh, well, then you know the guy over there on fries. I don't know him from Adam. Right. And I said, but he goes to Lafayette Jeff. And this guy goes, where do you go to school? Because the idea that you could go to school, the same school with somebody, and not know them, and their siblings and their parents and what they did for a living, was impossible for me to fathom. And this these guys have 2,500 kids, or
Yeah,
whatever. It's one of the largest schools in Indiana.
We had a couple of thousand in our graduating class. All right. So in October of this year is our 50th high school reunion. And there are people that are signing up for the Facebook page that I didn't even know I went to school with them.
I did the reunion for, I think it was our 35th year, and there was nobody I didn't know. I didn't know where they are today, but it's
you mentioned it's funny you mentioned about the trash cans, out front. When they remodeled my friend's McDonald's in St. Joe, I had a house with a pool in the backyard, and he brought us the old trash cans. Those were in the corner of my
the big heavy
the big like wood. All looked wood, but they were the fake wood that had the
look like paneling. I remember those.
Those were the things around my pool, which was McDonald's.
I knew those trash cans because
you probably cleaned a few of
the
them.
worst job you could get at McDonald's was lot and lobby and women's restroom. Worse, probably still the same. Worse than the men's. So, it would be my brother Mike, who would get on my nerves, and then I would tell him lot and lobby, and he hit me in the back of the head with a cream packet. The little cream that exploded, of course. I remember getting a review, and I was a good manager. I had keys to the store when I was very young, and that was like the happiest day of my life, the day I got to open. And if I was opening, I needed to be there at 5 a.m. I was there at 4, because I'm going to make sure my shift, everything goes perfectly. And I remember getting a review, and it was less than perfect. It was a really good review. Like if you got a 2, I think you're going to get the maximum raise, and I think I got a 1.8, and the lower it was better. But whatever it wasn't perfect. And I'm asking the guy, what tell me what I did wrong. Just help me to understand so I can get better, because I want to be perfect. And when it came to McDonald's, and he said, well, frankly, it's the way you manage your brothers. You can't treat people like that. And I'm like,
class.
Yeah. I'm like, you can't do that.
We have about 2 minutes. I wanted, in the 2 minutes ending, I just want to ask you to come back sometime in August if you can.
Sure.
Because there were so many. I want to talk about the Ronald McDonald House. Next week we will be talking about that. Sherry Houston, I believe she's the executive director.
Yeah, she is now the CEO as of this week.
CEO. She will be here sitting in your chair right there next week to talk about the Ronald McDonald House. But I'd like you to come back and share more of those stories and really talk about what the transition has been like, going from the McDonald's world to the financial world, and more of your leadership journey. Would you do that? Come back some?
I would be. That transition has been amazing. Perfect. Perfect.
I look forward to that. And to see the impact like you've had on your siblings, children, people that are around you that have been able to maybe bask in the McDonald's world, because I'm sure that the things you learned back then matriculate to other parts of your life.
I agree. Yes.
And we'll have a chat about that.
Okay.
Deal?
Sounds good.
Been a pleasure being with you.
My pleasure.
Our next Dale Carnegie class comes up here in Gainesville starting September 5th. You can go to jacksonville.dalecarnegie.com to register. And I believe there's one on the website for Jacksonville also. We'll be adding Tallahassee, some in South Georgia, Lake City, a lot more in this region over the next couple of weeks. And we had a great graduation the other night. Absolutely awesome. Please look for the Dale Carnegie Jacksonville Facebook page and see some of the pictures, or my own personal Facebook page, or Freddie Wiebe's Facebook page, and pick up on some of those because it was an absolutely magical night, Tuesday night. For my guest, Ed Potts, my name is Bob Ganzak. This has been Motivation U, the podcast.